You're a guy who is gentle and tough. You might be the man who's man enough.
It's the year 2287. The world is a mess, thanks to a nuclear war 2 centuries prior. Mutated killer animals and insects roam the earth. Bands of raiders and super mutants have popped up to terrorize and kill anyone who's trying to make an honest living in a ruined, hellish world. It's a messed up world. Any day, anyone can meet a grisly fate. Because of this, it's easy to see why men become evil. Why men who dot the landscape become selfish and only care for themselves. And yet, even in streets as cold as these, you can find one man who's still warm. In this video, we're going to discuss the fictional character from Fallout 4, Nick Valentine, and why he's literally us. Now, quickly before we begin, if you could please show me how you feel about the video by dropping a like or dislike and commenting down below what you thought of it, that would be greatly appreciated. And if you want to see more, please don't forget to subscribe and click the link in the description so you can go follow my meme page. Alright, thank you, Kings, and now we're going to get into the action. Every man has a story, a trail that leads to where he is now. For Nick Valentine, our story begins in 2077. Nick was a flesh and blood man, with organs and bones and all that. He was a detective in Chicago, a cop renowned for his quick wit and good instincts. At some point during the year, he was relocated to Boston, Massachusetts, to help with Operation Winter's End, a special police operation that was made to stop the mob family in Boston, which was headed by a man named Eddie Winters, hence the name Winter's End. Unfortunately, things took a turn for the worst. Eddie Winters found out about this operation to stop him, so in retaliation, he killed Nick Valentine's fiancée. And even worse for Nick, the ATF, or more like the gay TF, exists in this timeline too. For anyone not aware, the ATF, or the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, is a cringe-ass government agency created by the Antichrist to stop Americans from enjoying our fun, God-given right to do things like shooting a .38 out your car's window while you booze and cruise through a school zone. But I digress. The ATF, being who they are, made a corrupt deal with the with the mob boss Eddie Winters to give him full immunity from all the mob stuff he did, including the time that he had Nick Valentine's fiancée assassinated. After the corrupt deal with the ATF went through, Nick Valentine was devastated. He had moved his whole life to Boston so he can help take down an evil mob boss, and it was all for nothing, as the op was shut down thanks to a corrupt system. He lost his fiancée, and the man behind the slaughter of his fiancée got away scot-free. Nick Valentine was devastated by this news. Shortly after this, he was ordered to seek help for PTSD at the Commonwealth Institute for Technology. Here, he had his brain scanned, where they had made a copy of all his thoughts and memories. Around 2 centuries later, Nick Valentine suddenly wakes up in a pile of trash in a world decimated by nuclear fallout. He only has some recollection of his past, but right now he's noticing that he's made of metal and plastic and wires instead of human flesh and blood. He was deeply confused and traumatized for the next few weeks. However, as time went on, memories slowly returned in flashes or blips. He sees bits and pieces of his old life as a detective, and he also sees memories about the people who made him, the Institute. He begins to remember that they made a robot version of him, and that the Institute experimented on him over and over again. He still had questions, of course. Like, how was he, a robot Nick Valentine? How was he made? Why did the Institute make him? And then why did they leave him alone with nothing in a hellish world? Nick had both the mind of a detective and several questions, but he would have to shelve that for now, in favor of finding out how to survive long enough to see tomorrow. After a little bit, Nick stumbled upon a small community. When this community saw a tattered android walk up, the whole town ran away in fear. Well, almost the whole town. There was one little kid named Jimmy who walked up to Nick and began asking him questions. Getting human interaction for the first time in a long time, Nick happily talked to the child. When the town noticed that Nick was innocent, they all came out to greet him. Thankful that he wasn't a threat, the townsfolk became nice to him, and they all helped him before he was on his way. Nick never forgot their kindness. Unfortunately, it would be a while before he saw it again. Nick moved on and went to Diamond City, the biggest and most well-established city in the Commonwealth. The guards almost didn't let him in the front gate, and for good reason. A synthetic man just like Nick, a synth as they're called, recently mass murdered a bunch of representatives from all the Commonwealth settlements. People now understood that there were numerous synths out there, and not all of them good. When Nick got inside Diamond City, he faced hatred and discrimination. People thought Nick could go murderous at any time, and honestly, Nick didn't blame them. He used to be a flesh and blood human himself, and now he was scrap and sprockets. Over time, Nick began to earn their trust. At first, he was just a handyman. He fixed things and did things the other residents didn't want to do. However, one day that changed. You see, the mayor's daughter had gone missing. She was captured by 4 raiders, and Nick Valentine managed to find them on his own. When the raiders confronted him, Nick used their ignorance about synths against them. He just said that he was rigged to explode and started saying, "Beep, beep, beep." Nick had to keep from laughing as all the raiders were tripping over each other to get away. Then, like the Valentine he is, he scooped up the damsel in distress and brought her back to the mayor. The mayor was so thankful that from that point on, Nick was allowed to own a home and set up a business in Diamond City. Many of the virgin residents attested. However, the Chad mayor realized that Nick was real and said that he could stay from that point on. Because as we all know, real recognizes real. From this point on, Nick slowly gained more and more of their trust from the Diamond City residents as he turned from Nick the Synth to Nick the Detective. He took on more and more cases and he helped more people. He also got himself a faded trench coat and hat to show that he was serious about being a detective, and also he wanted to look cool and based as fuck. At some point, while doing detective work for Diamond City, Nick was captured by a mob boss called Skinny Malone, and he was locked up. The player character rescues Nick Valentine, who in turn agrees to help you find your missing son. Nick uses his detective prowess to help you find your son's kidnapper, and then he uses his synth body to help you access that dead kidnapper's memories. Yeah, that one's a long story. Anyways, after that, Nick Valentine doesn't have too much of a role in the main game, other than being a cool follower and offering some detective-esque side quests where you solve some mysteries across the wasteland. An important side quest he does have is if you travel for him long enough and you help enough people, eventually Valentine will tell you about the mob boss Eddie Winters, who killed his fiancée 2 centuries ago. This gives you a side quest where the two of you track down a still alive Eddie Winters. Again, a long story. And you both gun down the mob boss, getting revenge for Nick's fiancée. Nick the Synth then confides in you. He admits that he owes his life to Nick the Human, the detective 200 years ago. But now he wants to forge his own life and be his own man going forward now, considering that he just wrapped up what was left of Nick's life. And then, because it's Bethesda writing, Nick doesn't change or do anything different at all from that point on. But, you know what? We're just going to ignore that, Kings. Just ignore that shit. Anyways, finally, to wrap up the story of Nick, he plays a part in the Far Harbor DLC and for Fallout 4. Here, a synth called Dima explains the origins of Nick and himself. He tells the player character and Nick that Dima and Nick used to be experiments of the Institute. Dima was made and allowed to develop his own mind and thoughts personally and naturally. However, Nick was not. They kept re-uploading human Nick's mind to Nick's synth body over and over again. Dima couldn't stand seeing this, so he helped Nick escape the Institute and their torturous experiments by knocking synth Nick out and throwing him out with the trash. And thus, this is the full story of Nick Valentine. Originally a human who became a machine, but he was always a good detective and a great man. Nick Valentine goes through a lot throughout his story, and the harsh reality he's faced over the years, clashing with his good heart, is what made him into who he is now. Nick was a great cop, but that led him to losing his fiancée. Nick sought professional help for his trauma, and this led him to having his brain copied and his mind being put into a robot body, only for him to wake up discarded and traumatized 200 years later in a brand new world. Weeks after he wakes up, Nick meets people who are nice to him, but he finds out later that these nice people were killed by raiders while he was gone. Nick works hard for the people of Diamond City, only for them to be hateful and bigoted towards him. And finally, when he gets revenge and kills the man who killed his fiancée hundreds of years prior, Nick feels good that justice was served. But afterwards, he's still faced with the realization that his revenge didn't change much or answer any of his questions. Nick has been through all of this and more. Many lesser men would have cracked by this, or entered their villain arc, so to speak. But not Nick Valentine. Nick remains a steadfast force for good and hope for those around him. When people show him hatred, he doesn't sit there and take their insults or bad actions, he throws it back, but he also works to change their minds. When people fall in hard times, Nick doesn't take advantage of them. Nick doesn't remind them that he has it worse. Nick does what he can to help them. Nick has every right to hate this world and a lot of the people in it, and yet he doesn't use his energy to hate people. Instead, he spends his time making dry-humored wisecracks, acting like a badass detective, and improving the world while doing it. It is because these things that I find Nick Valentine to be a perfect literally us character. Nick's lost it all. His body, his girl, his life, his whole world. But what we can learn from Nick is that what can really keep you human is your heart. And how you react to the world matters. Nick cracks jokes. Sure, he'll share disappointment openly, but he remains stoic enough to often not lose his temper. Nick provides the blueprint for how we should react when we lose something in life, or when things go terribly wrong. If we act like Nick Valentine, we can make a joke about a bad situation, fix it, serve justice, and make things better for everyone. And that is why the synth detective Nick Valentine is literally us. And with that, I must bid you kings farewell, for now. Thank you so much to anyone who's watched the video this far. Just know that it means so much to me if you have. Please don't forget to like or dislike the video based on what you thought about it. Comment your thoughts down below. And subscribe if you want to see more. Also follow me on my meme page where I'm most active. Link is in the description. Until next time, you kings stay golden.
Gentle and tough, you might be the man who's man enough.